I have to say this is a first for me, teaching on Song of Solomon as a single, lifelong. I've heard this story many, many times. Not as often as you would think. This is one that people tend to shy away from because there's a lot in it that's like uncomfortable for some reason. Though it's not really uncomfortable. If you read it, it's quite beautiful. But we're going to talk about Song of Solomon today, and I think I'm going to be presenting it in a little bit different way. And you may not agree with what I have to say about it, and that's fine, because nobody seems to agree on Song of Solomon. It is a very difficult book. It is one of the most discussed and debated books in the Bible. The Hebrew, all of a sudden I'm losing my mind. Back in the Old Testament, and those who chose what were going to be the holy books for the Hebrews, they fought over whether it should be included. When Christianity comes along and they're putting together the scriptures, they fought over whether it should be included. But I think the key is going to be looking at it in two different ways. And I think that's what all of those who came to this conclusion came to. But it may be a little different in how you've heard this before, so we'll see how this goes. And as you know, right now we're in a period of great confusion with sexuality, marriage, love. I mean, it's all over the place. And we need the whole counsel of God during this time. And Song of Solomon can provide us some insights. And if it's not providing us insights for a certain period of life, young love, wanting to be with that person forever, it should provide us insights as older people who have been in a long-term relationship, and we see what that means to us in our lives. And then for those of us like me who are single, it serves as a reminder of how great the lover of my soul is, Jesus Christ. So it serves everyone, young, old, any age, but it's very different from most scriptures. And the reason is it's poetry. Poetry is always a little obscure, right? And poetry kind of often serves as a mediator between heaven and earth. It's taking these things that we see every day and then taking them to a different level for us to think a little bit beyond the everyday life. So what we see in Song of Solomon is true Hebrew poetry, and there's parallelisms and metaphors used throughout, and some of those are not easy to grasp. How many of you have looked at your wife and said, you know, your teeth are as white as sheep, and not one is gone? It's like, that's beautiful. It's a beautiful thought, right? Or she had hair that looked like the goats running down from Kiefer, and you're going, what? So those are the things for us it's kind of hard to figure out. But when you find out the goats from Kiefer had long black hair, it reveals, oh, so he's saying she reminds him of the flowing hair of the goats because she's got the long, black, beautiful hair. And of course she has all of her teeth, which was probably rare. Quite honestly, it could be rare today, right? How many of us have dentures and things like that, right? So it goes into those areas a lot. But the big question always is, should it be read as an allegory of the church and Christ, the Israelites and God, or should it be read as a commentary on romantic love, or both? And I think it's going to be both. Now, the Song of Songs is called this. I want you to think of terms like King of Kings and Lord of Lords. What that means is the greatest of all. This is the greatest of all songs. And it's not just one sensuous scene after another. It's really a series of love poems that capture the joys, the insecurities, the sorrows, the frustrations that accompany the journey of love in this world. And that's the beauty of it. You see God's hand in it, because he's really showing us what love really is. We're going to find out even more as we go. You have voices of friends in there commenting. You have fears and insecurities being voiced. You have temptations of the world with riches and honor and glory. But God is superintending all of this. And the love that the lovers share is what is said to be the very flame of the Lord in chapter 8, verse 6, towards the end of the book. So the big question is, did Solomon write it? Well, one of the big questions. And that is very hotly debated. It can be said that it was written during his reign, 971 to 931. And the book mentions him in his glorious reign. And the woman from the village of Shunem, which is a tribal inheritance of Issachar, and the town of Tirzah is mentioned along with Jerusalem in comparisons of beauty. Shunem and Tirzah are located in what became the northern kingdom. So all of this makes it look like it was probably written before Israel, of course, became a divided kingdom, which of course happened with Rehoboam after Solomon's death. So we can say, yes, it was written during Solomon's reign. But it's interesting when you look, and I know when I was younger, how many of you have always heard this, that Solomon is the lover? Most of you have always learned that Solomon is the lover. And there have always been parts of it when I've read it that said, this kind of doesn't make sense, though, for Solomon. First of all, almost the whole poem is a woman's voice. The whole thing. I mean, most of it is the woman commenting on all of this stuff. So, yes, Solomon had a lot of women. He certainly should have known them. But, whether he would write all of this in a woman's voice is something to ponder. From beginning to end, we encounter her perspective more than any other perspective. And then on top of that, of course, Solomon had all these hundreds of wives and concubines, and this whole thing is about being the one. The one. But it is meant to be read more than once. So I want to admonish you to maybe go home when you have time. It's only 8 chapters. And go through those 3 different ways of looking at it and decide for yourself, how do I feel God is really leading in this? And in fact, we all have different ways of interpreting things sometimes, and sometimes things like this that are a little more amorphous, we all may see different things in them, right? Like I said, I as a single will see different things than a married couple will. But it is meant to be read more than once. And what's really overwhelming in it is there is an overwhelming use of garden imagery. There are powerful echoes of the Garden of Eden throughout. Everything, as I said, they're comparing each other to the animals around them, the beauty of the earth, everything is being compared. And I was thinking about this, I said, we don't often compare things anymore, do we? If you have somebody you're in love with, your eyes are beautiful. There's no descriptor. What I say, you look like 2 computer screens. I love you more than I love my Game Boy. Things like that. It's a different world. And you look at this, and it's very much in touch with that the natural world that God made. Everything is in comparison with that. And you see that you see them as vulnerable and yet unified, the 2 lovers. And that's how it is most of the time. You're very vulnerable. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable place being in love with someone, right? You're opening yourself to them. But it's a celebration of human partnership and acknowledging that physical love is not something base or ugly. We have made it base and ugly in our world. It's become nothing but a physical thing. But it's a gift from the Creator. And the first thing he told Adam was what? Adam and Eve. Be fruitful and multiply. So this was part of the grand plan from the very beginning. And they're not to be ashamed by it, but be ennobled by it. And it's almost like with these two lovers, we witness people who are so in love, it's untainted by selfishness and sin, which I'm sure it was, but in this poetry, it's like they're purely in love with one another. And we'll see it's what it says here as we go along. Now, as I said, again, with Solomon, part of the problem too is there are times you'll see when you read through it that she's with Solomon, but she's thinking things that seem to be with the shepherd. She's thinking of the shepherd. The one she says, my love. This is my love. He keeps the flocks. Was Solomon a shepherd? Not that we know of. Now, he could have been when he was young. Some say he was a young man. This may have been his first love. But he's a king. So the possibility that he's out there walking around with sheep is very low. Or he's laying in the lilies is very low. We'll see, too, that there are times when she's searching for her lover. Where is he? I can't find him. She runs through the streets. He's the king. I don't think he'd be just kind of wandering around the streets, right? So there are things like that that kind of made me decide I want to present this today in light of the true lover being the shepherd. And I think it's going to surprise you that has a lot of meaning in it too. The shepherd. So since I was saying this is written in a theatrical style, we're going to go through it as scenes, okay? And I'm not going to read through all the particulars on everything. As I said, some people get uncomfortable because there are some very graphic things that, you can figure out. People hide their kids' ears in church, things like that. But we're just going to look at it scene to scene. So the first scene takes place in chapters 1 and 2. And it's in the king's inner rooms. 1:4 says, the king has brought me into his chambers. So obviously, she has been brought to the king because those who are brought to the king are intended to become part of the king's wives or concubines, right? But yet she is thinking about her lover. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. Your anointing oils are fragrant. Your name is oil poured out. Therefore, virgins love you. Draw me after you. Let us run. The king has brought me into his chambers. She's not saying that necessarily about the king, right? It's not clear. You see that she will say this over and over, and it seems to be more in line with the shepherd, the poor shepherd that she's been in love with, and now she's pulled into the king because she's beautiful. There's no doubt about it. You see down in verse 5. Well, first you see there's a chorus there, like a Greek chorus. And the Greek chorus is probably, the daughters of Jerusalem, they're called at one point. We will exalt you and rejoice in you. We will extol your love more than wine. Rightly do they love you. But then she responds, but I am very dark but lovely, O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Do not gaze at me because I am dark, because the sun has looked upon me. So she's sunburnt. She feels like she looks like a dog, right? Just saying, hey, don't look at me. My mother's sons were angry with me, and they made me keeper of the vineyards. My mother's sons. That's a new way to call your brother. Hey, my mother's son. They may have been half-brothers, but they had made her part of the vineyard. She was also already a shepherdess. We'll see where he talks about going to the flocks. But they were making her also work the vineyards. And as we have learned in the past, right, Solomon was bringing people in to work vineyards and all of that to bring money into the kingdom. But she's being forced by her lovely brothers, whether half or not, to work out there. And then she says, tell me, you who my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you make it lie down at noon. For why should I be like one who veils herself beside the flocks of your companions? I don't see Solomon with a flock and telling her, this is where my flock is. I work here. This is, again, a different way of looking at this. So I just ask you to stay with it. So she's already saying, hey, I'm having some problems. I'm having some issues. But then Solomon appears. Solomon does appear in verse 8. If you do not know, O most beautiful among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your young goats besides the shepherd's tents. I compare you, my love, to a mare among Pharaoh's chariots, who had 40,000 horses. Solomon. And he's comparing her, the only way he knows how, as all of this is all of the book is full of, as I said, of nature. He's comparing her to a mare among all of his horses. I don't know about you, but I've been volunteering at the zoo, and spring is a big time. And I witnessed, they brought together 2 jaguars at the zoo. And they're introducing them because jaguars are usually solitary, but then they have to introduce them over a period of time so that perhaps they'll mate. So they called me and said, hey, we're going to have an outdoor, greeting. So everybody was running over there. And the first thing that happens is they come out and you're, just madness. And everybody's gasping. And this little kid goes, did somebody die? I said, no, you're okay. It's going to be okay. But their keeper was telling us, this is typical. The male and female come together, and she is not having any of it. It's like, you're going to have to win me over. It is not something I'm interested in right now. So every time they meet, they go through this whole ritual. And he goes over and he grabs his toy barrel and drags it over, and he lays down and huffs and puffs. And she goes and stands out in the water and just looks at him. And then you start seeing they start kind of flirting with each other. And then he starts following her, and then she'll turn back and yell at him, and then she keeps on going. It is a game of chase and catch. This is exactly what's happening in Song of Solomon. It's chase and catch. Solomon's trying to chase her, but she already has somebody she's in love with, the shepherd that she's been in love with and is probably planning to marry. But now he wants her. This puts her in a dire situation, right? Kind of reminds you of Ruth and Naomi, where she has to go and lay at the feet of another man because she loses the man she loves. You've got Esther, who was called into the king's courts. But this woman happened to have somebody she was in love with. At least that's how we're going to look at it today. Okay. So he starts his wooing, like I was saying the jaguar does. He starts wooing her and telling her how wonderful she is. He compares her eyes to those of a dove, which always does drive me crazy because it's the bird of peace, but they're the dumbest birds on the planet. So whether that would be really a good thing or not, I'm not so sure. But anyway. But then, though he's there, the woman is thinking, though, behold, you're beautiful, my beloved. Truly delightful. Our couch is green. The beams of our house are cedar. Our rafters are pines. She's thinking of where she came from and the lover that she has, the man she's in love with and wanting to marry. She's not thinking of Solomon. But then she tells Solomon in 2:1, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And I love his response. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women. Well, great. So now you look, you look kind of rough. You're in the middle of brambles, but you're beautiful to me. But then again, she starts thinking, and she keeps stating this throughout the song. She tells the daughters of Jerusalem all the way through this book, do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. She says this over and over. And this is a term, an admonishment that you must stay chaste. Don't stir up love until it's time, till it's the right time. And then she says the famous line, of course, we all know from Song of Songs 2:16, which in Hebrew is ani ladodi vi ani delodi. Vidodi li, I'm sorry. Ani ladodi vidodi li. My beloved is mine, and I am his. She is talking about her true lover. That's who it is. And to this day, Jewish couples are saying, this is my true love. And this is what they will say under the chuppah to each other as they're getting married. In 2:8 through 10, we see her imagining her beloved coming for her. She is wanting to be with him, and she's stuck in this place with the king who is trying to woo her and have her be one of his hundreds. And she says, the voice of my beloved, behold, he comes leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. He stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, looking through the lattice. My beloved speaks and says to me, arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. She's imagining that he's going to come for her. She wants him to come for her. So now we move into scene 2. It starts in chapter 3. It starts with, on my bed at night, I sought him whom my soul loves. Again, it's whom my soul loves. You'll see these statements are very personal and they know somebody. They know this person. It's not like it's some stranger that they've just met. She dreams of looking for her beloved in the city streets at night and searches asking the guards about him. And then again she says, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the does of the field, you do not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. So she's seeking, she's dreaming, she's looking for her lover, and he's not there. She's asking the guards, where is he? Now, if it was the king, I would think they'd say, well, he's right in there. But that's not what's happening. Scene 3 is chapters 3 and 4. And this we have Solomon showing up and we see his entrance to Jerusalem. Now, this is a typical I want to get married type march coming in. And the women are all saying this. He's arriving for what he's going to hope is going to be a wedding. And they say, let's look at 6 through 11. What is that coming up from the wilderness like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all the fragrant powders of a merchant? Behold, it is the litter of Solomon. Around it are 60 mighty men, some of the mighty men of Israel. All of them are wearing swords and expert in war, each with his sword at his thigh against terror by night. King Solomon made himself a carriage from the wood of Lebanon. He made its post of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple. Its interior was inlaid with love by the daughters of Jerusalem. Go out, O daughters of Zion, and look upon King Solomon. So he's coming. They see the dust in the distance. Imagine a play. There's the dust in the distance. So I think of what is it? Lawrence of Arabia, where you look and you can barely see, and then you see this little sprick of dust, and there's somebody out there, and you can't believe it. Look, that's somebody out there. He's coming. And all the daughters of Israel are just all agog over him. And Solomon starts speaking then in chapter 4. He starts praising her. He's praising, and what's interesting is he's praising everything about her body he can think of. Everything, which is typical, right? When you're wooing a new person that you're falling in love with, you're gorgeous, you have the most beautiful eyes, your hair is great, you walk so wonderfully, all of that. And what you see in the book is later as you read, what the shepherd's saying is much deeper than that. It's all about who she is, how strong she is, how much he loves her. He loves her as a sister. He calls her that several times. And it is a much deeper relationship. So Solomon is really wooing her. And she doesn't necessarily come back with anything great about that. She's still thinking about their love, her love. And she says, until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go away to the mountain of myrrh and this hill of frankincense. She's thinking of being somewhere else. She is thinking of being somewhere else. In verse 7, you see, you are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. She's thinking of all the things her lover has said to her. Verse 9, you have captivated, and this is the term that really turns it for me. You've captivated my heart, my sister and bride. That term sister is very much a connotation of intimacy, somebody who has known her. Solomon barely knows her. She is known by this man she loves. So the charming words of Solomon aren't quite working. All of his glory and gold and everything, the man she'd have it set for life, right? And she's still thinking of this poor little shepherd boy who's sitting with a flock, but who loves her dearly. Scene 4, chapter 5, presents a woman dreaming of her anticipated marriage. And she dreams of her beloved coming to the door, and she hesitates yet to go to the door. We're not sure why. She's saying, hey, I'm all cleaned up. I don't want to have to get up. Now, some of you older people, you would say the same thing. I'm not getting up. I just took a shower. It's the same type of thing. She's laying there. She goes, no, I don't want to dirty my feet, basically. And then she starts, this is my beloved. And she again looks for him because she's dreaming this again. And she asks the guards again, but this time the guards are beating her. She's not supposed to be out in the streets. She no longer has favor with them. And even the daughters of Jerusalem don't seem to care. So her love and desire for her beloved is growing. And everyone's kind of turning against her at this point. Now chapter 5, or scene 5, is chapter 6 and 7. Again, Solomon is trying to persuade the woman. And the chorus says, come to us. We want to see you. We want to talk with you. You're beautiful. Look how gorgeous you are. They make all of these, again, external descriptions of how she is. But then this is where also she receives the name Shulamite. Have you noticed she has no name? She has no name. And the only time, it's not until you almost get to the end that she's given the name the Shulamite. And that's the only way we know anything. So they're calling for her to return, and then she says, what shall you see in the Shulamite? She comes as a company between two camps. That again makes me think, she's between two lovers, What are you coming to see me for? I've got this conflict here. But then she again states, I am my beloved's, and his desire is for me. We see next that in chapter 7, the beloved comes, and it appears he comes for her, and she tells him to leave, to go back with her to the village in chapter 7. And again, she admonishes as she's leaving the women of Jerusalem, Do not stir love or awaken love until it pleases. In scene 6, the woman in chapter 8 comes back to her home, and she's with the love of her life. Again, she says, O daughters of Jerusalem, do not stir up love or awaken love until it pleases. And then let's look at verse 5 through the end of chapter 8. Who is that coming up from the wilderness, leaning on her beloved? Now we have the exact picture of Solomon coming, but now she is with the shepherd, going home, leaning on the one she truly loves. And they're looking and say, who is that? Set me, verse 6 says, set me as a seal upon your heart. This is the Shulamite speaking. As a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, jealousy is as fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised. Go down to verse 10. She continues, I was a wall, and my breasts were like towers. Then I was in his eyes as one who finds peace. She's saying, I was a wall. I wasn't letting anything in. And I had towers. But now that I see him, I find peace. I am at peace. She goes on to say, Solomon had a vineyard at Baal-Hamon. He let out the vineyard to keepers. Each one was to bring for its fruit 1,000 pieces of silver. My vineyard, my very own vineyard, is before me. You, O Solomon, may have 1,000, and the keepers of the fruit 200. It's kind of a mix there. She had a vineyard she was caring for, but she also is referring to her body's her vineyard. I have a vineyard right here. And Solomon can have all of those hundreds. He still wasn't up to his maximum at this point. He only had about 700 at this point. But she's saying, but Solomon, he can have all of that. I have my vineyard here, and I've protected it. And then, O you who dwell in the gardens with companions listening for your voice, let me hear it. This is the young man. This is kind of a Hebrew way of asking for marriage. The companions are there as witnesses, and he says, let me hear it. Will you be with me? And she says, make haste, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of spices. She is ready to marry him. Now, there's lots of things we can learn from this. We can learn about waiting for love, waiting for the right person. We can talk about keeping oneself chaste for your mate, which is a hard thing anymore because that's not happening a lot. And also, throughout, it's interesting because the lover praises her purity and chastity in 4:12. A garden enclosed is my sister. Remember the term sister, my spouse. A spring shut up, a fountain sealed. He's not getting anything, he knows it. But he loves her for that. He's wanting her to be for him only. It's teaching about young women and men about deciding whom to marry. Do you just look at the one with all the fancy chariots or cars? Do you look at the one with all the money and all the wealth, who's saying all the pretty things, really flattering you? You look fantastic to me, even if it is about sheep and goats? Or do you wait for the one who really loves your soul, who really loves you as a person? Song of Songs is about understanding the affection of your spouse. I'm sure that as you get older in marriage, it's harder sometimes to understand because you think you've heard it all and seen it all and you've said it all, and there's always a surprise. But you know, the one thing about this, and I would admonish you if you're married to sit and read it together, because it might be an eye-opener to really feel that love of youth and remember what it felt like when you first saw each other, when you first started dating, when you had your first meal together. You weren't just slopping stuff on plates, you're fixing it all up special. You're making flowers, candies, all of those things. Remembering that, because you need to remember that as you go through life. You need to remember, this is how it all started. This is why I love them. And it's even deeper now, because we've been through so much together that I can't imagine my life without them. And it's again, a song about remembering the stirring and the beauty of love. Remember, Proverbs 18:22 says, "He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord." And even if you aren't a wife or you haven't found a mate, your lover is God. He loves you more than anything. So what can we glean about our relationship with God from this? The Old Testament Jewish, and this is what's really interesting when you look at it this way. In the Old Testament, shepherds were used as leaders of the people. They would watch for enemies, defend the flock, tend to the sick, wounded sheep, rescue the trapped sheep. But the image of the good shepherd shows that a good shepherd protects and gives his sheep and guides his sheep, while a bad shepherd does not. God himself was referred to as a shepherd throughout the Old Testament. You can find it in Numbers 20, well, actually the first time is in Genesis 48:15. "The God whom before my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day." Numbers 27:17. Psalm 23 is the most famous. He's our shepherd. There's several Psalms, 28:9, 74:1, 79:13, Isaiah 44, Micah 7:14, Jeremiah 17:16, Ezekiel, and Zechariah all comment on God being our shepherd. Now, if you recall in our studies from Samuel and Chronicles, what was the one thing that Israel wanted more than anything else? To be like the rest of the world. A king. A king. And it was to their detriment, remember? It ultimately led to their enslavement and diaspora as a nation. Their love and sense of protection was totally in the wrong place. They were looking at all the glitz and glamour. The good shepherd, though, still watched over them in spite of their errors. He continually loved them, truly and deeply, patiently waiting for them to accept his love and to come back to the covenant that they had set with one another. And he still does according to his faithfulness and promises regardless. And like with the lovers of in Song of Solomon, there was an intense desire, a seeking and a finding between God and his people, year after year, time after time, and even going on today. Now we know that the imagery of the Good Shepherd also carried over into the New Testament, right? Jesus called himself, "I am the Good Shepherd." We see it across the New Testament in Matthew, Mark, John, Hebrews, Peter, Revelation. He is the Good Shepherd. He says, "My sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me." And a shepherd knows his sheep well. There's a personal, intimate relationship between Jesus and his followers, and he knows each of us by our names and better than we know ourselves. On the other hand, we respond to his voice, and we should not be following all that glitters with gold or looks good in the world. We must respond to his voice. Remember in the story, the shepherd was knocking at the door, was trying to get into the room, and she was hesitating. So like in the story, he stands at the door and knocks for us as the good shepherd. And we, like the Shulamite, we have to let him in. When we're separated by sin or by doubt or fear, we must reconcile and seek him. And he'll always be there for us in return for us. Then we can walk through our lives leaning on the beloved, the lover of our soul, in peace and the fullness of love, just as the Shulamite did with the one that she truly loved. One last thing, in the Song of Solomon, the shepherd and the Shulamite are in the end united. What the Jews did not realize was that the shepherd would be the true king, the great King of Kings who would come and reign again for all eternity over the earth. Ultimately, the song holds out hope that even though our relationships are so often distorted with selfishness, and love is a transcendent gift meant to point us to something greater, it points us to the gift that God's love will one day permeate and transform his entire beloved world. And what we see at the end of the story, with the shepherd being truly the king, she chose the true king. She didn't need Solomon. She chose the lover of her soul, who would be the true king, if we look at it in that sense. So it's a different way to look at it. You may not agree, but I admonish you to really read the book and read it several times, because there's a lot to be gleaned from 8 small chapters. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you that you are ultimately the lover of our soul, that you are the one we long for and we want to be with more than anyone else. We thank you for all the gifts you give us on this earth, and we thank you, Lord, that one day you will come back for us and take us home. We look forward to that day, Lord. I pray that you'll be with each one of us. Bless us in this week. In Jesus' name, amen.
Jesus.